loves, and welcome to the October reading wrap up, where I go over all of the books that I read in October because there was a lot. I did DNF a couple of books and I'm still reading and finishing up a couple of books, but I still managed to read quite a lot. Now, in terms of books that I DNF'd, two of them I will probably give a shot in the future, so we're not really going to talk too much about them, but one of them, this book. This is Supernatural Enhancements by Edgar Cantero, and now admittedly I didn't get that far into the book, but it did make me super uncomfortable because the author was constantly reminding us that she looked like a kid and he looked like an adult, and then he would say weird things, and it was just uncomfortable, awkward. I couldn't get into it. I hated it. I hated it. So DNF'd this, have no intention of ever continuing it. As for the books that I did finish, I ended up finishing Misery by Stephen King. And this is a story about a writer who ends up getting in a car accident or something along those lines, and his biggest fan finds him and saves him by basically keeping him hostage and trying to force him to write for her. So it is pretty intense. I really like the concept. I love hearing the thoughts of the writer and that experience and some of the stuff happening. Generally, I think it was interesting, but I wasn't in love with the process, so I ended up giving it 3 stars. A little bit unfortunate. I haven't seen the movie. Some people say that it's a little bit better, so I might give that a shot. We'll see. Next up here, we have Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson, and this is a story about a girl who wants to be a singer, who ends up working with a musical prodigy who is much older than her and who is pretty much trying to groom her and is inappropriate and does kind of not the best thing. So it's her experience with this, basically this pedophile, and her obviously not knowing what's happening to her being wrong at first, and then having different things happening and having it get like worse and worse and worse and more extreme. And it was heartbreaking, and there were some interesting things that happened, some twists, some turns. We do know that somebody ends up dead right off the bat. We do know that she was there whenever whatever happened, so we're just trying to figure out what led her to do whatever. It was a wild ride. This one I think is a 5 stars. This is a good book. Yeah, Tiffany D. Jackson has been killing it for me as an author. Next up, we have Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. This is apparently the story that ended up inspiring Dracula. This came out like 26 years before Dracula, so this is very old, and it shows. Not only do we have very dry Victorian writing, there is also a little bit of unnecessary racism in here with one random description of a black maid that was kind of horrible. A lot of, like I said, very dry Victorian writing. Now, to some degree, that's kind of nice in the fact that this is so short. It wasn't too overwhelming, but it also wasn't crazy enjoyable. I did hear that there was some sort of sapphic element to this, but the relationship between the girls didn't really feel all that strong or interesting or whatever. Overall, this book was just kind of meh for me. So this one ended up being another 3 stars, possibly more of a low 3 stars, but it wasn't terrible. I just didn't love it, is basically where we're at with this. Then I have You Must Not Miss by Katrina Leno, and this is a YA story, a creepy, weird story about a girl who is kind of struggling to take care of herself. Her parents are split, her mom's not super responsible, her sister has gone off to college and has basically abandoned her, and life is kind of hard and difficult. So to cope with what's going on, she basically has created a world called Near, which is the flip of the world that she's actually in and is her ideal version of the world. And one day she ends up getting access to her imaginary world, and obviously things aren't quite as they seem. This was fairly enjoyable. I actually really did like it, even though it is on the YA side, and I tend to not be as interested in YA. I'm still drawn to them. Obviously, I read a lot of YA still, but I liked it. I think it was good. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I think it's great. The ending is a little bit ambiguous, but I didn't mind. It got me thinking. Overall, it was good. I also ended up reading Horrified by Katrina Leno, which also is relatively ambiguous in certain ways. This is a story about a girl who ends up going to an old house with her mom after her father dies, and they have to kind of go back to this house, and she doesn't really know much about it. There's creepy things. The town knows certain stuff about it, you know, whispers and whatnot, and she's just trying to get by when obviously some spooky things start happening, and she starts uncovering certain things and learning certain things, and it is a weird, fun time. I enjoyed this one. I also gave this a 4-star. I feel like at the ending I was a little like, how am I feeling about this? But in the end I'm like, yeah, no, this is cool. This is cool. I liked it. Then we have Dracula by Bram Stoker. So this one is a chunker. It's fairly long. Fortunately, there's no like blatant racism, or not at least that I remember, but this is very, very dry Victorian writing. We have a bunch of different character perspectives that we're going through. It's written in different forms, so we have like letters and diary entries and things like that. Although I enjoyed reading Dracula and comparing certain bits to media like portrayals of this that I have experienced over the years, I was bored at some points, and I just feel like it was way too long for what we were doing. So that was a little bit of a disappointment because I was pretty excited, but I will say this book got me feeling inspired. It inspired me to want to make a better version. So this one was another 3-star for me. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. There were things that I really liked. There were parts that I liked. It made me think of, oh, it would have been cool if they did this, or it would have been better if they did that. So it did inspire me. I think it did some cool stuff, but it was too long. It was too dry. There was too much repetition. It was a lot. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but I wouldn't not. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. Now we're actually going to get to some of the digital books that I ended up reading this month before we continue with the rest of the physical books. So I ended up reading some haunted house stories, starting with The Haunting of Ashburn House by Darcy Coates, I believe. And this was a story about a girl who inherited a house, and she's struggling. I believe she's a freelance creator, and she goes to this house. It was good timing that she ended up in this situation because she is basically out of money, not sure what she's going to do next. She goes to the house with her cat, and obviously some spooky things happen, and she discovers some stuff, finds out some stuff. It's a fun time, high intensity. The character, I really liked how she wasn't stupid in her actions. That was really nice. And just overall, I think I really enjoyed this. This was another 4 stars for me, but it wasn't entirely my favorite. There were some things that I felt kind of meh about. There is a kind of friendship sort of thing that ends up happening that I think was really nice. I loved the cat. I loved the characters' reactions to a lot of things. Not everything. There were some dumb moments, but for the most part, I feel like she was a pretty strong, smart character, and that was nice in this kind of haunted house, spooky, paranormal sort of situation. So that was the first one. The next one that I ended up reading, I believe, is called Everton House. This one is a dual timeline situation in this house where a new family moves in and starts experiencing some spooky stuff and learns about the history of the house, while we are also experiencing 100 years before where things actually go down in that house. Now, Now, I did enjoy a lot of things about the book. I did guess some things about what was going on, which I actually thought was relatively fun. Although the general experience was pretty enjoyable, I did feel sort of let down by the ending. So that was kind of a bummer. This one I think is a high 3 stars for me. And then we get to the last physical book that I completed, and that is The Haunting of Gillespie House, I think, also by Darcy Coates. And this one is a story about a girl who I think is house sitting, and she is at this house and she's uncovering some information as weird things start happening. Now, there are some things that happen in this one that I hated. I was all like, this is stupid. Why would you do that? Why would you act like that? You don't care about these things. I felt like the character in general was annoying, but I felt like the backstory and the idea behind it was relatively cool and interesting, and I ended up enjoying bits of that. I wish there were some different tweaks to it to make things make a little bit more sense, but like the first Darcy Coates, I still enjoyed it, and I think I give it a mid 4 star. And before we get to the rest of the physical books, I did also start several more haunted house books at that time, but didn't get very far into them. So not much to say about them, in all honesty. I will probably read them again in the future, but I think I started like 3 other books that I got, 20, 30 pages in before I was all like, nope, not what I'm looking for. And then back to physical books, I also read A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson, and this is a love letter by Dracula's first bride to Dracula as an explanation to why she's killed him, or something along those lines. So this was absolutely fantastic. I had such a good time. This is also nice because it's talking about basically, I almost want to say like marital abuse and manipulation and just issues that you can get in power dynamics and all of those things. And then you're also having our character gain back her voice and her power by never actually calling Dracula Dracula. In this letter, she doesn't name him. She takes his name away from him. And there's such a beautiful meaning behind that, and it's lyrically written, it's beautiful, it was really enjoyable. I especially liked a lot of the lyrical writing in the very beginning, and then we kind of get more into the storytelling a little further and we lose a little bit of that, but I still ended up enjoying it overall quite a bit. So this was a low 5 star for me, almost a solid 5 star. It was up there. I really like this. Then I ended up reading Alexis Henderson's House of Hunger. And this is a story of a struggling or poor Black woman who works as a maid and wants to improve her life. And she finds a job listing in the relationship columns or whatever for a blood maid, because it's a more personal job description sort of thing. And it's where these really rich houses up north basically hire women to bleed for them so that they can consume or ingest the blood. In a lot of the cases, it's for medical purposes, this, that, or the other. And even though it is frowned upon from the people down south, she decides that she will do it because it ends up giving you a lot of luxuries being a blood maid. So she goes, she ends up kind of building this relationship with the people that's around her, head lady of the house. Things start happening. Things aren't what they seem. She starts uncovering stuff. Things start happening. It's a good time. This one, 5 stars for sure. This was wild. This was a wild ride. I really enjoyed myself and I think it was really well done. I don't know what else to say. Then we have In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. And if you saw the vlog of me reading this, you will know I hated the first 9 chapters. I was gonna DNF this book. This is a book about a group of friends who come back to a school reunion many years later and are confronted with some shady things from their past in relation to a murder that happened those many years ago. And the first 9 chapters, it's just introducing us to this friend group in the past, and I hated it. I hated the characters. I hated how messy they were. I hated the main person we were experiencing everything from. Once we get to the now, and they're trying to uncover what's happening, and the flashbacks and the information that we get are now in relation to the murder. Oh boy, I got sucked in. I loved it. I loved it. I was so into it. And I would have given it 5 stars if I hadn't hated the first 9 chapters so much. So this one's definitely a really high 4 stars or a low 5 stars. But yeah, this one, it did it. I loved the messy friendship. Once there was a solid thread for me to follow while uncovering this information, I was on board. I was here for it. I loved it. So yeah, this was a good one. Maybe I don't know. I don't really want to recommend any books in general because, like, obviously we have our own taste. People like things that I don't like, and I'm gonna like things that you don't like. But if that sounds like something you're gonna like, you should read these. Which brings me to my next book, Mary by Nat Cassidy. I have an entire dedicated spoiler-free reading vlog for this because this was a wild friggin' ride. Like, this was wild, creepy, unsettling the way that things were described. It wasn't necessarily scary, but it did have some moments that definitely got me, and I had a scene that I struggled with. This is not a book for everybody. It gets gruesome and gory and detailed. I don't know if gory is really the right way to say it, but like, it describes things, certain things. And I know it's not gonna be for everybody, but I loved it because this is a book about a woman who is basically reaching menopause. And she is experiencing some really awful things, specifically hallucinations, where when she looks at herself or any woman of a similar age, instead of seeing them as they are, she watches their face rot and disintegrate literally in front of her. And so she's freaking out, like, what the hell is happening to me? Why am I seeing this horrible, gruesome stuff? And through some unfortunate situations, she ends up going back to the town that she grew up in to kind of help her god-awful aunt who is experiencing some health problems and who is on her own, basically. And so she goes to this town and things kind of get worse. And now she's trying to figure out what's happening to her, how it has to do with the town and things going on. And she gets kind of in the middle of some stuff. It was a lot. Now, this was so close to being a favorite book of mine, but there is something that sort of happens in the ending. Not absolutely terrible, but I feel like there wasn't enough to make it clear what the commentary was, or if it was commentary on something, or just like a stupid slip. In this case, I think everything was, for the most part, done really well. This is a story about menopause and people, society kind of shunning women as we get older, and it's written by a man, and he did a great job. Now, I did see some people saying that all of the struggles and the oppressions and the issues that women went through, there was like too much of it. Like, the commentary was overdone and it was really just like, it's not that bad. But I didn't feel that well. I felt like it was good commentary. I ended up reading this physically and annotating the whole thing, and the experience was great. Reading it was great. It was hard at some points, but I really liked it. So this is a 5-star still, but not an all-time favorite because of that little thing. I even said it was like a high 4-star, but let's be honest, it's a 5-star. Okay, and then the last book that I ended up reading this month was We Can Never Leave This Place by Eric LaRocca. And this is a novella about a girl in a war-torn area whose father dies, and her mother brings in somebody and things are weird. And I'm gonna tell you, for a lot of this, I was confused. There are certain things that were disgusting. There are things that, like, I just wasn't sure of. It went in a direction that I was kind of expecting, but not 100% sure. There's some blanks and some emptiness and some questions that are put together, but overall, I think this was really well done. Even though part of me hated the experience of reading it, it did exactly what it wanted. It was successful in the feelings that it made me feel. And so this is definitely a high 4 stars, low 5 stars for me. And that's it for all of the books that I ended up reading in October. I didn't actually put these in any particular order. I didn't even put them in order of the books, like when I finished stuff. Aside from this, I did actually finish this last. But yeah, that was a fun time. I ended up, I think, completing like 14 books out of the month and starting 20 something. It was a time. We did a lot. I do have some vlogs for some of these. I don't know if I'm gonna list all of them, but maybe I will. The books will be in the description box down below. We're doing NaNoWriMo this month, so I'm going to be talking about a lot of writing while reading, so check out those vlogs, and I will see you in the next one. Until then.